Hi, I'm Zizi, class of 22. I'm in the astrophysics department. Um, I guess I'm also getting certificates in African American studies, and planets and life, like astrobiology, all that fun stuff. On campus, I'm co-chair for Orange Key, I'm a head fellow for City, and I'm vicar chair for Cottage. So I'm a little bit of everywhere. But yeah, that's me. I'm from South Jersey too, by the beach. Okay, so stars are mostly made of hydrogen and helium. They're like 90% hydrogen, like 10% helium, and there's some other like heavy elements tossed in there, but they're mainly hydrogen and like a little bit of helium. So basically, in outer space, essentially there's just a bunch of like gas and like dust particles just sort of like floating around. And then in these big like clouds of dust, there's like turbulence. So like in some parts, like velocity's like it's moving a lot, right? So in those like parts, the like molecules and the atoms and dust, and they start like forming together. So they just sort of like cause knots in like the big gas, like knots will form. So yeah, those happen, and then like in those little knots, they start like starts like forming together, obviously. And then like gravity happens, yada yada. These little clouds that form, these little knots, they start to like collapse into itself because of like gravity. And then the centers start to heat up. And then you have like protostars, so that's like basically like it's like a baby star. So it's like a little tiny, like, well, not tiny, but like in the center is really hot, and then eventually it'll like start splitting up the things, and it'll become like the star that we know and love. But it starts off as like literally just like a ball of gas. Like a star our size, it'll take like 50 million years or something like that to like mature from like the protostar to like adulthood, right? So you have your protostar, they're just like hot in the middle, they hang out. And then your protostar, since they still have like some like gas and stuff around them, it'll break up into like 2 or 3 actual like stars. Like it'll break up into smaller pieces, and then they'll each form their stars, which is why like star clusters happen. And then that's like the most time that a star, like most of its lifespan is during this time period where they're turning hydrogen into helium, and that's like emitting light and all that good stuff. And those are like our main sequence stars, right? So that's like most of their lifetime. Eventually the core, she collapses when like the hydrogen runs out and the nuclear reaction stops. That's when like things start, the core collapses, and then a little shell forms around the core, and it starts pushing away like the rest of the gas and stuff that's like outside the core. And then you become a red giant, right? So it's just sort of like hanging out. So typically we know how old stars are and a lot of like other properties of stars by looking at stars that we do know. And a lot of the times we just like to compare it to models that we have, right? So I mentioned before, like main sequence stars. So like we have this like very iconic graph. So there's many types of plots and stuff, but we have one in particular that the HR diagram that we like to put stars onto, and it's like a big branch, and you're like, these are main sequence stars. Like a lot of their lives are gonna happen here. So basically you look at like the spectrum of the star, its luminosity, like how bright it is, as in like its motion, how she's moving, and then you can sort of compare it to models to see like, oh, it's acting similar to this star, and we know how old this star is, so like bada bing bada boom. Constellations are just groups of stars. They're not really formed in a way, so like I mentioned before, stars like protostars, they can like split up into like 3 stars, right? So when stars are born, they kind of just naturally cluster together in a way. And constellations are formed. It's sort of like, how like people say that humans try to see faces everywhere? It's sort of like that. Like humans just sort of looked at the sky and they're like, oh my God, like look at that. Like that is a shape. So like, boom, we're gonna call that a constellation. So usually the brightest stars usually have like cultural meanings, or like you can tie them back to like myths. And then when we come to like modern day to refer to them, and like when we notice like stars around them, there's some options. So sometimes they just like take the constellation that it's a part of, and then they just sort of like add a Greek letter to it. Sometimes they run out of letters, they just add numbers. Sometimes they add double letters, or it's like TT this or like RR that. So like, there's like, okay. And then when we get to stars that are like founded today, it gets kind of lame because like usually they'll just like name it after like the person who found it, or to make it convenient for like all astronomers, they'll name it on like where they found it in the sky. It sort of just like describes the sun and like the location of the earth at a certain time. So I think they started like when people, like I said, people were looking at the stars, where I'm just going to say the Greeks, right? They're looking at the stars and they're like, oh, you know, when we are in April, the end of April, we look a lot at Taurus, right? Like April to May, we keep seeing the Taurus constellation. So this time period, our girl Taurus, like it's going to happen during this time. So I think it just correlated to like the time period that like where the sun was during the year, which constellation it's near. And then they sort of like match them up. They don't match up much anymore now. Like during Taurus season, we usually aren't looking at Taurus because like the earth shakes. So like in like the thousands of years, she's kind of like moved off the like zodiac path. But yeah, in a year you can see all 12 of the zodiac constellations. I'm a Taurus. Yeah, no, gay. I'm a Taurus. I'm very stubborn. But also everybody has moon signs, sun signs, and rising signs. So like your sun sign, like I'm a Taurus, that's the sign like everybody knows. But you have other signs as well. So like, and then there's like other signs after that like make up like your you. Oh my God, I love. Okay, so essentially you just want, in any place in general, you want to make sure that there's not a lot of light pollution. So a good place that I go to is the roof of Peyton, which is the Astro building, because I mean, why not? You don't have to be high up, like you can see stars from the ground, but like, I mean, why not? It's fun just being high up. On that note, I also do like, you didn't hear this from me, but I do like the football stadium. That's a good place to go. Power Stadium, Power Field, just like go up to the top. She's fun, and also you can like walk around the circle so you can see like all angles. That's fun. But yeah, just try and go somewhere that there's not light. So obviously like don't go to like where there's buildings like Carolman, because there's like those like lights. Don't do that. But yeah, most places on campus honestly are pretty good because for some reason our campus is not well illuminated, so do with that what you will. Also, I'm a frequenter of the Forbes backyard. The Forbes backyard is very, very good to look at stars. They're very nice. When it's not cloudy and stuff, you really don't need anything. Like you can just go look at the stars. I suggest, depending on like the time period, you like not just say like Google is free, but like Google's great resource. You can say like I am in New Jersey and it's May, like what stars can I see? And they'll be like, oh, like this star will be bright, this you should be able to see this guy, like yada yada. That's fun. The main concern there is like just like human life and just like time. So like we have light years and stuff, like to get out of our solar system, like it's just going to take a lot of time. So you just need to like figure out how to preserve human life. Like what's that movie that had like Jennifer Lawrence in it? You know what I mean? Passenger. So that's the main concern. Like you just have like, it's just time. Like it's just going to take a lot of time. And I think if you figure out how to move fast enough / preserve, if you figure out how to move fast enough, how to like preserve humans to last that long, or if you're just moving ridiculously fast, which you can only reach a certain level of how fast you can move, but like you still have to protect humans at that point still, then it's like, okay, then we're cooking there. So astronomy sort of started out as astrology, right? They were sort of like together as one because like they didn't really have a good way to like separate them, essentially. So like if we have a throwback all the way before the Romans, probably what's before that, like Mesopotamia and stuff. I think Mesopotamians like made a lot of like constellation observations. So they sort of used what we would call astrology as their like astronomy, and they use like like I said, they use the zodiac and like things like that in order to like keep track of time and all that good stuff. Yeah, and then that's when they were sort of like, oh, we can keep track of celestial time if we split it into 12, all that good stuff. If we split it into that time of year. And then I think it was the Greeks that sort of were like actually started to like make astrology sort of like how we view it today, like personality traits and things like that. Mainly because, you know, we like the Greeks love their gods and such. So they started to link planets and constellations. And then they're sort of like, oh, like if we link these together, then they have the effect of Venus. So therefore, like now they have like traits of Venus and like romance. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah, people usually ask about like the raisin bread comparison. Universe is expanding. We don't really know into what, but like we only know it's expanding because raisin bread. Like the big metaphor that people use is like, imagine you're baking some raisin bread, right? And imagine we're a raisin on the bread. Before we're baked, we're like, I can see that raisin over there, right? And then as the raisin bread bakes, we start being like, that raisin's further from me. Like, that raisin's further from me now, right? Because like we only have the perspective of Earth. We can't like leave Earth and then like look down and see it. I would say, I mean, just go for it. There's so many different like ways to like get involved. Like if you like really like astrology, like if you want to get super into astrology, you need to know more like astronomical things, right? And then when you're in the astronomical realm, you sort of end up knowing more about astrology. So it's just fun. Like even if you're like, oh, I'm gonna start off with my zodiac sign and like go back and like figure out the history of that or whatever, you can do that. Or if you don't want to be like a super history buff, you can just like chill out and look at the stars. Because I think all of us are astronomers in a way, because who doesn't like to like just look at the stars and just like hang out? Like it's fun to think of like we look at the same stars that like the ancient Greeks did, and like all of us look at the same moon. So it's cute because it connects humanity in a way. But yeah, I love, have fun with all your astronomy things.